listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I'm James Rivera. Today we are going to be doing a special on Netflix horror. And the reason we're doing this is it seems to be one of the most Googled topics in horror. It's one of the things that's most looked up. What horror is good on Netflix, or what is available to watch on Netflix? We're going to let you know. For the record, Netflix is not really the best streaming service for horror movies for people who are always looking for horror. That is never going to be your best bet. If you want horror, Shudder is a better streaming service, just purely on horror. And if you want to talk about a generalized service, Amazon Prime, which obviously is not a horror streaming service, has a really wide selection of horror movies that go very, very deep. I feel like Netflix's selection is kind of elementary in comparison to a lot of what's available on Amazon Prime. What about you, Michael?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's common knowledge among horror fans that there's slim pickings when it comes to Netflix, and they've always kind of been that way. But it doesn't stop them from releasing some real doozies. They release some really good horror films sometimes, but you just don't hear of a lot of really notable new releases coming out like Shudder and Prime that's pretty much dropping all the time.
Yep.
Where on Netflix, you'll get 2 or 3 really good movies every few months.
Yeah, that's the way I look at it. But since it is one of the most requested things in horror, we're going to cover it today. We have 3 Netflix selections to you to discuss, and Mike and I, 3 Netflix horror films that Mike and I are going to be giving our opinions on.
And I didn't even realize they're all 3 foreign movies, 2 of them from England and 1 of them from Indonesia.
Oh, that's true. I didn't really think about that until this moment.
Await further instructions. It's a sci-fi horror from 2018. It's directed by Johnny Kevorkian. It's only his second feature after he did the Disappeared in 2008. This being only his second feature, he already died.
Really?
November of last year. I mean, he was 48. He was 48, same age as me, and he had a heart attack.
Oh, that's very, very sad to hear.
I'm like, damn, how sad. Like 10 years between your first and second feature. You do your second feature, and then you die of a heart attack. It's a cruel world sometimes.
Well, at least he got to live his dream while he was here.
True. It's written by Gavin Williams, and this was also his first feature film. And it's as I said, it's a film from England. And it stars Sam Gittins and Holly Weston. They play the brother and the sister, and they were both actually in another British horror film in 2015 called Howl. Nirja Naik plays the girlfriend. She's a really standout in this. And then Grant Masters, David Bradley as Grandpa. He's that ornery-ass old man, Walder Frey. He played Walder Frey on Game of Thrones and killed all the Starks in the Red Wedding. Keeps with the form that he had on Game of Thrones on here, just a crotchety, nasty old man. It starts out as a typical story of a dysfunctional family gathering on Christmas, but it turns deadly when they awake in the morning to find a strange black barrier around their home and instructions being given to them through the TV. It's pretty obvious. I mean, they hit us over the head what it's about from the very beginning. I mean, the family name is Milgram, which is the name of the test of obedience to authority. And also they lived on Stanford Street, a send-off of Stanford Prison Experiment, which I still haven't seen yet. You told me it was quite good, right, James?
It was a good film.
We got the whole setup. We kind of know who these people are. It's mostly bad people. You got your racist grandpa chiming in right away, and he taunts the dad and emasculates him, and then you can see pretty much right away why the dad is such a weak douchebag. And this negative energy kind of spreads through the whole family. Like, everybody deals with it in their own way. And then you have the son bringing in his Indian girlfriend, and that causes a stir in the family. So it really starts off as your basic dysfunctional family on Christmas story. And
on
then
Christmas Day.
you see this black substance kind of close them into their house. They already start freaking out when the TV says await further instructions. So they're already ready to freak out as it is before the instructions even start. The characters get worse and worse the further we go into the instructions on the TV. It starts out somewhat plausible, like something's going on here. Maybe we're being protected by something, there's some kind of catastrophic event. The instructions get stranger. It starts telling them to strip and scrub themselves with bleach. They send needles in with some kind of mysterious vaccine. The instructions get progressively stranger, and the bad people just don't care. They're ready to follow whatever's on that TV at all costs. It starts getting strange and alien. It doesn't seem strange to them, just follow whatever it says. And then it turns religious. Fine, whatever it says. And then you get so frustrated because it's a lot of bad people and it's a couple good people surrounded by all these horrible kind of piece of shit people. And then just like in our society, when people are put in danger like that, they get progressively worse and worse. So I can see how it can be frustrating as you go along. Of course, the dad, I think is even of a bigger wanker than the grandpa is. I hate people that are domineering and weak.
Mm-hmm.
He's domineering. He has to have his way. But then when the shit hits the fan, he's weak. You hate to see people like that win in a situation like this. By the final act, it goes full sci-fi horror. Strangeness, everything kind of comes full circle. You don't know exactly what this thing is, but you see that it's some type of alien presence, some type of higher level of organism is kind of coming in and kind of forcing these people to worship. It's constantly saying, worship me. I thought it all fit. The behavior of the characters is maddening and strange, and then it gets stranger as outside influence gets stranger. I like the whole dynamic, and I like how it goes batshit crazy at the end. So, it had its problems. It wasn't a perfect movie, but I found it exciting and interesting.
It's a very interesting Netflix horror movie. I'm not entirely in love with the movie, but I did enjoy it quite a bit. Though, as a warning, it is probably going to frustrate or piss a lot of people off. A big part of it is the family that the young man is returning to for Christmas. He's bringing his Indian girlfriend. These are Brexit type of British people. They're very angry. They're extremely prejudiced. There's a lot of racism. They're always making underhanded, nasty comments towards his Indian girlfriend. They have a very toxic way of thinking. They're always trying to egg each other on. The grandfather is a completely rotten asshole. And the father, like you said, is an asshole like the grandfather, but even worse because he's weak and domineering and likes to take control of the situation. But it's very obvious that he really can't handle it. The sister is frustrating. The sister and her boyfriend are frustrating. There's a lot of takedowns of sorry to use the buzzword, it's going to annoy people, toxic masculinity, as you might call it. There's a lot of takedowns of that, a lot of tackling the prejudices of and obviously this is going it's happening obviously in America, and you see it kind of spreading to the UK and different parts of the world, and this is a horror movie that seems to tackle that. So a warning, these people are infuriating. They're going to piss you off. So I ended up enjoying this movie in a very perverse way, since other than the young man who's returning home with his Indian girlfriend for Christmas, and the mother who just seems like she's being forced into a situation that she doesn't want to be in, I pretty much loathed all the characters. And as the movie gets progressively, I don't know how to say, I guess, weirder, stranger, or more violent, I ended up enjoying it in a very perverse way. A lot of the horror in this movie, and it is definitely a horror movie despite all of the social things that we just can't describe to you, I think the horror in this movie comes from the way that these ignorant people act when they are put under high pressure. It's horrifying what they do to each other. It's horrifying the way that they react to each other. One of the most interesting things is this was made in 2018, and the reason that they're shut in, according to the television that's giving them all of the instructions, there's some kind of epidemic going on outside, and they're slipping in. They slip in some hypodermic needles through a slot, and there's a big debate whether we should take these needles. The young man, his girlfriend, is a medic, so she knows that they're not sterilized and that it's not a smart thing to just take something and you don't know what it is. Weird that this came out in 2018 because there's a big debate in the movie about it, whether or not to take the vaccines or whether or not to trust the government. It seems to be tapping into 2020 and 2021 right before that hit us and right before it happened. So there is a kind of commentary on there about questioning authority, whether or not the vaccines are safe. However, don't interpret that, and I know a lot of people will just because it came out so close to this. The movie might seem to have an anti-vax message if you look at it from that point of view, but you got to keep in mind that this movie came out before the pandemic hit. Therefore, it's not trying to make a comment on whether or not you should be taking vaccines or not. It's more about challenge. It's more about believing everything that authority tells you. Obviously, I'm not going to compare it because the vaccines in real life have been prepared over a year, and I guess they were working on it before. And the vaccines here are things that nobody knows what they are. They just shove them in a slot. Here, take them, and the needles have obviously been used. So I feel like for some people, when they watch it, they're going to think that's an anti-vax statement. The movie came out before that. There's no way it could have predicted that was going to happen. Like I said, the horror comes out from the way that these people act. They get so aggressive with each other that they end up in violent situations. And I must say, I ended up enjoying it because all of the shitty people in this movie, all the people who are really prejudiced, terrible, idiotic buffoons, end up getting what's coming to them. And most of the time, when they get what's coming to them, it is completely, totally, and 100% their fault for not being able to for handling the situation wrong, for being shitty people. So there's a lot of moments where I think you're meant to feel a little sympathy where some of these people get hurt very badly, some in unbelievably horrifying ways. Maybe it's the sadist in me. I don't know. I ended up enjoying it and smiling and smirking every time these people got hurt because I thought they were just such shitty people. And they all put themselves into that situation. So I watched it with the kind of weird satisfaction of watching terrible people get what's coming to them.
Well, one thing about this movie is from the premise and some of the clever things going on, it seems like it should be a much more clever, much more layered movie.
It could have been with what they have going on in it, yeah.
Yeah, but the message and everything that it's about is all right there on the surface. There's nothing really to dig deep in on this one.
There's no subtext. Stuff that would, like, a lot of these, in horror movies, the type of topics this is tackling, like prejudice, fear, stuff like that, that would be all in the subtext of the horror, more metaphorical, not like this one lays it all out on the surface where it's in the dialogue of the people, of the characters. So it's kind of, it's not subtext, it's just text at that point. So yeah, it's kind of hard to miss what this movie is trying to tell you.
And there's no interesting character arcs or character development or anything. It's just all just fun, crazy horror with a clever concept.
Yeah.
It has social commentary, but it recites all the social commentary in the first act.
Yeah, stuff we already know. So basically, if you want to see a bunch of Tammy Laurens trapped together in a house, torturing each other and then hurting each other because they're stupid, this is the movie for you.
I probably wouldn't have liked it so much if it hadn't gone just so insane at the end. Mm-hmm. When the thing reveals itself and then kind of wires are holding people by their heads and kind of puppeting them. So that made the movie for me.
That actually was the opposite. That I don't know. I guess it was leading towards that, but it didn't feel like a sci-fi horror to me for most of the time. I thought there was some kind of social commentary. I think they kind of, at least what I got off of it, it kind of suggests some type of government experiment or something like that going on. So I thought it was very strange, and I don't like the last 2 or 3 minutes of this movie. The last 2 or 3 minutes really just it goes all right. My problem with the last 2 to 3 minutes is that it does something, reveals something brand new to the story, and then ends on an ambiguous note. This movie either needed to be more ambiguous than it is, or it needed to spell out what it was going for at the end a little bit more. I think the question that it raises at the end of the movie is very unsatisfying. Now, if the question that they raised at the end of the movie had been raised throughout the movie and they didn't answer it and it was explored as kind of a theme or part of the story, I might have swallowed it a little bit more. I might have liked it more. But as it is, the very last 2 minutes show something in there that the movie is not up to explaining or going for. And I really think they should have either just let it on the cutting room floor, or if they wanted to go that route, they needed to explain a little bit more what was going on at the end.
Yeah, they're trying to say something that's more clever than the movie is.
Yeah, and like I said, it feels like it's tacked on in the last 2 minutes. I don't think what it was going for at the end is present throughout most of the film.
Yeah, and for me, it's mostly just the zaniness and how it went over the top, because it felt like a natural progression to me because the character interactions became more and more zany and implausible almost to a point, you know. So that kind of just progressed into like insanity all around them. And the by the end, didn't this whatever this presence was, whatever this force was that was manipulating them, didn't it seem very dumb by the end? Like
Yeah, it did.
It seemed like a very elementary type of entity by the end.
That's what made it seem kind of, that's another thing that's questionable about it. It's an entity that is giving instructions to the television, and these instructions seem like they're designed to make for this particular family because the television is watching them. It sees how they're reacting. So the instructions it gives them are the type of things that they know are going to lead them in the exact wrong direction that they're supposed to be going in. It seems to be playing, the entity seems to be playing these very masterful, well, I guess it's not masterful. When people are that idiotic, it's easy to manipulate you when you're that fearful, prejudiced, hateful, angry, and suspicious of everything except authority. You're apparently not that easy to manipulate. Regardless, it still seemed a little bit more sophisticated. There's moments where it starts taunting the people that it's manipulating, where you just see the whatever the instruction is, and then you'll see somebody will be staring at the TV and you'll see a flash. It says, "I see you," letting you know that we know that we're watching you and we are mentally fucking with you. By the end, when it starts puppeteering the dad and trying to get it to worship, it almost seemed funny to me, or kind of desperate, where you used all these very subtle, like these psychological manipulation, and now you're going to puppet a dead man and try to make us believe that like, it just, you know, I could see like what you mean by the entity seemed kind of dumb. Like it seemed like it ran out of smart tactics and it thought it would try anything to try to get these people to still behave in the manner that it wants it to, and apparently it's not working because it reveals itself to be an entity that's manipulating everything.
Yeah. It starts out feeling like an experiment, and then it ends up feeling like it just fucking with them for enjoyment, and then it seems like it's just doing whatever it can. It doesn't even seem like it knows what it's doing by the end.
Yeah,
it's just fucking with them.
Yeah, so that's a wait further instructions. It's not the most subtle movie. It's not the most nuanced movie. But it is interesting for a good majority of its runtime. And if you're like me, you'll probably get some perverse pleasure of watching hateful, prejudiced bigots tear each other apart.
Yeah. Maddening, but fun. I thought it was fun overall.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So, and that one was await further instructions. That one was from England. The next one we're going to talk about is another one from Indonesia. We've been talking about some Indonesian horror films recently with Satan's Slaves and Impedagore. This one is from 2018. It's May the Devil Take You. Written and directed by Timo Jahanto. And he directed the Safe Haven short on VHS 2, which I thought was the best short out of all the ones in VHS 2. It's the one where the group of documentarians go in to infiltrate a cult, and then the cult ends up being like this supernatural crazy shit. But he directed that short with Gareth Evans, who directed The Raid and The Apostle, and that was about an Indonesian cult. So I thought that was really cool, and he showed a lot of promise with that short, and I think he shows even more promise here. The synopsis is: Alfie is estranged from her family after her mother dies in a brutal accident. She finds out that her father is falling into a mysterious coma and travels to his villa where her signature is needed to sell it. Her and her stepsister must then deal with an evil force in the house while they uncover a disturbing secret about the father's death. This one right here, much like Await Further Instructions, it painted itself as something more than it ended up being, but it never quite lost me. I kind of accepted what it was about halfway through, that it wasn't going to go into an intricate, dramatic story. It's going to set up the story in the first few minutes, and the rest of it is just going to be a scare fest. And I thought it was very good for what it was. We jump right into the story, and the film never lets up. Even when it kind of runs out of story, the film never lets up. They're like, we're kind of finished telling the story, but we're going to keep scaring you anyway, or making attempts to scare you. And I thought it was pretty good attempts. We're drawn into Alfie's world immediately. I thought she was an excellent protagonist. The great score is apparent right away. I love the score throughout. We see the devil coming for the dad. All those sequences are really cool. Really cool. I love the goat horn demon. I love when a movie finds ways to show a fully formed demon. I love that, especially with the goat horns. There's an awesome sequence when Alfie is dropped off at the old house, and it's in that really cool woods location. I swear, these Indonesian movies, I fall in love with these locations. Even if the movie isn't, grabbing me the whole time, it's those locations. I just love being there. It's just a cool experience. I love the visuals. I love the way they use the locations. I love the lighting. And then you see, I was really, up to this point, I was really following the family dynamic and everything. I was into all of it. And I think the last scene where I was invested in the family's relationship is when Alfie kind of gets in a falling out with the rest of her family, and she kind of gets sent to her room. And then her brother Ruben comes in to kind of comfort her, and they have a nice bond right there. And that kind of just went out the door. I never seen that kind of family dynamic after that through the rest of the movie, and that was less than halfway through. So when I became really invested in that family dynamic, and I kind of seen it wasn't going anywhere, and it kind of lost me for a bit, and I was saying, where is this going? This, a lot of characters are kind of meandering, waiting for the next scare. The story kind of halted in the middle of it sometimes just for a long scare setup. But then just when it starts to lose me, there's this awesome sequence comes up when they look into that secret door that's in the house. They open that secret door, and then an unseen entity floats out. And then you have like a kill that has to do with hair. A character gets pulled into the basement, and their fingernails are like being torn off while they're trying to scratch. I've seen other similar scenes like that before, but that was really effective. But a character being dragged across the floor and just tearing up her fingernails. And then that's when I saw, okay, this is exciting and theatrical, but it's somewhat of a disregard of realism. Like, it set up a lot of realism, a lot of cool family drama, a cool family dynamic, bonding of the brothers and sisters, and then kind of abandons that, but it's still exciting and theatrical. And then you get the possessed character that stalks the girls in the woods. I already mentioned that I love the woods locations, and then that crazy looking demon with the big sharp teeth in that woods location stalking those girls. I thought that was really well done sequences. It didn't drive the story forward at all, but it was cool looking and intense, and that was followed up by another great sequence of the demon under the bed. And then that really cool moment where Alfie stares the demon right in the face, and all this crazy shit happens. And you have another sequence of a possessed character pulling her face off, and there's a demon underneath. So much cool shit. And then you get toward the end, and you get to the big climax and stuff. And this is much like Wait Further Instructions. It's more and more ridiculous by the end, but I was having so much fun with it. And I was so impressed with all the different sequences and the setups of the scares. I was still enjoying it 100%. So so you get at the end and you have this long badass demon fight sequences, like a couple of them in a row. They have to do with voodoo dolls. Very cool use of voodoo dolls in a fight with a demon. So it ends up you have this really explosive climax. This is not a layered experience. This is a scare fest with some very effective scares and practical effects, awesome practical effects, along with some great visual ideas that really leap off the screen. But it lacks focus. It kind of abandons the storyline and kind of meanders for a while, but I think it all works just because the scare sequences are so good. But so it lacks focus to me, but it's still a lot of balls out fun.
It's balls out, but a lot of this doesn't work for me. And here, my big thing with it is the first 30 minutes of this set this up to be, remind me a little bit of Impedagor, the other Indonesian horror film, which I put as my second favorite horror film last year. It almost has a sort of elevated horror type of setup, the way that the movie goes along. It reminds me a little bit more of something like Hereditary or, The Witch or something like that, but obviously in Indonesia. But there's a very careful laying down of different family dynamics. The way that it introduces these characters, it introduces them very mysteriously, and just by the way that they're interacting and a couple of the things that they say to each other, you get to pick up on an implied history between all of these characters, what their relationships are. And most of the relationships are not good relationships. They're very strained relationships, and there's a lot of strained relationships, and there's a lot of resentment. I think Alfie is an awesome horror protagonist, especially the way that they set her up. I think is wonderful performance, like a really good involving character. I love the first 30 minutes, what it has to do with her father dying, going to the hospital and having to meet. And we've all been in awkward situations like that, having to confront family that we haven't talked to in years or we might have problems with. There's this really horrifying sequence at the hospital where she's visiting her father. It actually kind of scared the shit out of me. It's so atmospheric and so rich and so layered that really had me going for like 20, 30 minutes. Then they get to the cabin where Alfie's there, and then the other family members show up. And there's some interesting stuff going on there. But once the horror of the movie kicks in, it stops seeming like it doesn't even care about all the intricacies it set up in the first 30 minutes and proceeds to be a scare fest. An effective scare fest, no doubt. There's wonderful visuals. I even like some of the first attacks. There's a lot of a visceral quality. But after a while, the story, like I said, like you said earlier, the story is already done. The story is already told within the first 30 minutes, 30, 40 minutes, and the rest of the movie is just set up from scare to scare. So I was able to accept, okay, the story's over, I'll just accept the scare fest. But even after a certain point in the last 15, 20 minutes, I felt like the movie had showed me all it had to have already showed me. I didn't care in the last 20 minutes. I was actually just sitting there waiting for it to end, where it didn't work for me at the end because the story was over, so that was out of the way. And I felt that it already showed me what the movie was. And the last 15, 20 minutes is just a repetition of the same type of setups I've been watching for the past 30, 40 minutes. So I stopped caring. I just noticed that I was just waiting for the time to end because I felt like this movie has shown you everything that it needs to show you. It's already given up the game about what it is 20 minutes before the movie's over, and by that time, it's just kind of running on autopilot for me. And I think that's what's most disappointing, is that it sets itself up to be this very complex, nuanced horror story that I thought was going to be very enveloping, and it ends up being something very simplistic. And not only simplistic, it's something that eventually becomes repetitive. Like you said, there's a lot of meandering. You could sense that the story is halted at a certain point, and we're just waiting for the next big scare to come up. It felt almost mechanical to me. And don't get me wrong, this is made with a lot of technical skill. It's beautiful. The makeup works. There's a lot of filmmaking energy in there. It just felt repetitive to me after a while. Like the movie was over and it's still running.
Well, for me, there's a place for all of it as a horror fan. Like there's a place for the ones for the movies like Impedagor and Satan's Slaves that are more layered and dramatic and has an air of realism about it that makes you feel, makes you feel the horror more. But then there's other ones like this that are, yeah, it kind of threw me off when it set itself up for something different than it ended up being. But once I accepted it for what it is, I just love the scare fest.
So there's a place for all of it, but not all in one place. If you're going to be an elevated horror movie, be an elevated horror movie. Don't spend that much time investing it and building that up and then be just a straight scare fest. If you want to be a straight scare fest, that's fine. There's room for that. But don't trick me into thinking that this is something more complex than it is. So while I do get that, the movie has an identity crisis. You could have either picked one of these routes, because a complex, nuanced horror story with a lot of intricacies is not compatible with a straight scare fest that's kind of simple and elementary. Like, I love both of them. I mean, fuck, one of my favorite horror movies is The Evil Dead. That movie is as basic as it gets, but it is so committed to what it's doing, and it so thoroughly goes with what it's going for, where this movie just couldn't seem to make up its mind. And not only that, the brother Ruben, interesting character, and by the time the movie was over, I stopped caring about him, and he actually became kind of annoying after a while, because I felt like his character became useless, and I just didn't feel he was going anywhere. And the movie sets up a good relationship between those two characters, and it doesn't really do much with it. I have a hard time complaining about it. Technically, it's beautiful. It's well shot. There's a lot of energy that goes into it. It just seemed like it needed to stick to one type of what it was and commit to it. And that's my big issue, is that I spent 30 minutes thinking this was going to be something else. And 30 minutes is a long time to spend in such a short movie, setting something up to that extent and like going that far with it. Because like I said, the first 30 minutes of this movie, I thought by the end I was going to be in love with it. Like, I was convinced that I was watching. I was like, holy shit, this is going to be like Impedagore or something like that. And then it just turned out to be another riff on The Evil Dead.
But the opening scene does tell you that there might be a scare fest, though, because you do have one of those kind of outrageous scares right at the beginning.
Yeah, but there's still a lot of
the witch and everything. Yeah. And it does have that Evil Dead spirit to it, but it's more like the Ash versus Evil Dead spirit.
Actually, that's a good way to put it. Ash versus Evil Dead.
Like, and I started to compare it to Ouija Origin of Evil, but it's not quite as good as that, because Ouija Origin of Evil has the setup scare, but it also has the compelling characters and drama and story.
It's kind of interesting for a movie like Ouija Origin of Evil. That I like that movie a lot, and that's one of the few straight like scare fest movies where it's just straight jump scare after jump scare that works on me. But thinking back, like you said, in between the visceral elements, in between the jump scares, the characters are still interesting, which is kind of funny to me, because thinking back, Ouija Origin of Evil doesn't spend a whole lot of time developing its characters because it's really committed to being a scare fest, but they're just interesting enough that it keeps you grounded in between. Where in this movie, it seems like they didn't really know what to do with the characters after a certain point. Once they got to like the visceral horror qualities of the film, it's like they didn't really know what to do with these characters anymore, and just decide them to have them sit around commiserating on what they're doing before the next jump scare goes on. You even told me before that you noticed that there didn't seem to be much going on. All that's going on for a lot of the movies, just commiserating. What are we going to do? And, just debating back and forth. Are we going to go out? Like, basically, it's just debating strategies, commiserating on what a horrible situation this is. Then a jump scare comes in, something crazy happens, and then debating strategies, commiserating about how horrible this is, and then a jump scare. And then we go back to that. I'm like, is that really? This movie feels like it's running in place for the entire time. Whereas Ouija Origin of Evil, it's nonstop. The scares are arguably even more relentless, but it doesn't feel like in between it's running in place. It felt like the story was advancing with each jump scare and each plot twist, and each character was advancing. And there's an escalation, there's a progression to it. I don't feel there's any escalation or progression to like the last 40 minutes of this movie.
Yeah.
They go out into the woods and they get trapped and then they come back, and like it just seems like it's too stuck. Like the story can't pick up or go anywhere, because all it can do is wait for its characters to get horrified by the next big jump scare that's coming through. And it has, to me, seems almost mechanical. And I don't mean to insult that, because these are really elaborate scares that they go for. I could tell there's a lot of effort that goes into the jump scares and the makeup effects and the camera work and everything. Like, it's technically they did a fantastic job. It's just the characterizations are too weak to survive it for me.
Yeah, and overall, I ended up being really entertained by it. I really liked it, but I totally get any complaints about the story, because there was a point where I was disappointed in it too, and I kind of had to shift my expectations in the middle of it in order to enjoy the rest of it. So I get the complaints, but I ended up just respecting it and liking it for what it is. And I found myself comparing it too much to Satan's Slaves and Impedagore, and I just thought it wasn't fair. Like, this is going for something different, even though it seems like it's going to go in that direction at the beginning. That's just not what it is. So I just had to accept it. So I ended up overall enjoying May the Devil Take You. So I can't wait to see May the Devil Take You 2.
See, I'm actually really looking forward to seeing the sequel, because from the things that I've heard about it, it commits more to the visceral qualities from it. It has better reviews, and I keep hearing that Alfie is like that. I've heard from a handful of people that the sequel to this movie makes Alfie like a really badass horror heroine for the ages, like a badass final girl, which is kind of cool, because I felt like the character was there. The actress who did a fucking fantastic job. I actually really liked Alfie a lot, but I felt like the character was having such a strong protagonist. It could have been a lot better. I feel like even Alfie was shortchanged by the movie. So I would like to see a movie with this concept refined a little bit, and a little bit more attention paid to Alfie. Give more use of that character, because I did like that element of the story.
Yeah. So I look forward to seeing that one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the same director and everything. So I like when a director does his own sequel.
So do I.
So it seems like maybe he's gonna improve on what he fell short on the first one.
Yeah. So for our next Netflix horror special, we'll probably be tackling that one too.
Yeah.
The Devil Take You 2. Hopefully it's better.
TOO.
Yes.
So the next one we're going to discuss is the newest Netflix horror film that we watched this week. This one is His House from 2020, written and directed by Remy Weeks. And it's a story by first-time writers Toby Benabliss and Felicity Evans.
Mm-hmm.
And it stars Sope Dirasu as Bol and Wunmi Mosaku as Rial. She is from Lovecraft Country. She played Ruby in Lovecraft Country. So I really loved seeing that actress in something else, especially horror. So Sope Dirasu and Wunmi Mosaku play a refugee couple who escape war-torn South Sudan and struggle to adjust to their new life in an English town that has an evil force lurking beneath the surface. I thought this was a very interesting story setup and characters. But for me, this one is the one that the story stayed in one place too long.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of told the story in the first few minutes, and it was kind of all symbolism and metaphors and things happening. I mean, is this stuff happening figuratively? Is any of this real? Is it all in their heads? The story stopped progressing, and it became all about the message. I see that, I fully got that they're struggling against the evil and their own demons. And this is a little different from some of the other black horror that we've seen recently, because some of the people around them in England seem to be making an effort to help them. And they actually care about the refugees, but they do suffer some alienation and people picking on them and stuff. But so it still ends up being somewhat dehumanizing, but the true horror doesn't come from other people here. It comes from the actual evil force. And I thought it explains the evil force well, but it just, I don't know, just the story didn't progress enough for me. So it's a I love the interesting history of their tribe and the connection between their past and their current demons. I thought it was a little heavy-handed the way Rial vocalizes exactly what the evil is, like it's the Opeth, and kind of over-explains what it is, but I was still digging it. And then the main characters, you know, very it shows the dynamic between a man and a woman, and how a man handles a situation like this and how a woman handles it. So it's a classic story of a man wanting to fight a fight that he can't win, and then the woman's intuition makes her want to leave, and the guy won't listen. But this all gets overturned at the end.
So here's what's interesting. I think I had an opposite problem with you. Is like, I actually found the story compelling, and it's not done telling its story. Like, most of what it doesn't reveal what has been going on and the reason. And I'm not going to spoil it, but a lot of it has to do with their daughter and how haunted they are when they were refugees trying to come across what happened to their daughter. I mean, it's not really much of a spoiler. You could see at the beginning that the daughter's gone, but you don't really know that much about her. And I think what happens as the story goes on, you learn a little bit more the way it doles out information, and it starts to make the horror make more sense in terms of why they're being haunted and what happened. It starts to make sense in terms of their past and what they had to do to get over here. It's actually pretty dark. I think it says some fucked up things about what people have to do as refugees to survive. However, having said that, the weak part of the movie for me is the actual horror itself. None of the horror in this movie scared me or had me on edge at any point in time. There's some of it that's well shot and that's well done, but the horror in this movie doesn't work for me. I think the drama is compelling. I think that the storyline is interesting. And I think it makes a great justification for the haunting that they're in. And it kind of snaps the story together and makes it feel like good. I think the acting is good. And I think it makes some interesting points. But it just is not scary enough as a horror for me. That's mostly what it comes down to, is that I never felt any tension in any of the horror sequences. I was never scared by any of it. I was never, ever on edge. I was invested in their drama and their story, and I felt like the story twist was very compelling, but it just, as a horror movie, it doesn't sell its scares enough for me. It doesn't feel atmospheric enough. I mean, it's well shot. That's not the same thing as atmosphere. So I did not get any sense of tension. And I watched it twice now. I actually appreciated it more on a second time. I wasn't really crazy about it the first time I saw it. The second time I appreciated the story and a lot of what they're going for and the acting and the message behind it. It's just, as a horror movie, it does not work to me. I just did not get scared at any point in the movie.
Well, also the story that we're told in this, most of the story that we're told is a story that's already happened. So we're much more invested in what happened before what we're watching than what we're actually watching.
Yeah, kind of like the mystery of why it's happening and slowly doling it out. Like I said, that was interesting, but go on.
Another thing that I didn't like about these characters, but I actually loved the characters, but I thought it kind of abandoned who they were a couple times, because it really bothered me when it would go back and forth, like somewhere around the middle of the movie, it would go back and forth where she knows exactly what it is. She knows it's a supernatural force. She knows what's behind it, and he's not convinced. And then another scene or two later, nothing really happens between those scenes, but in the next scene, he knows what it is, and she acts unconvinced. That just took me completely out of it. I'm like, just a couple scenes. She was trying to explain to you this was a supernatural force that's coming in on them, and this guy balked at it. Just like literally one or two scenes later, he's like trying to convince her, and she was just convincing you, dude. Why are you trying to convince her? And now why is she acting like she doesn't know what's going on? But then it still has some great sequences, like that. The one that's on the cover where it's a great moment where he sits alone at the table, and then we pan out to show his isolation. It's kind of a piece of the wall behind him, and then the rest of it's just this open water to signify, the tragedy.
I have a question about that. Is that metaphorical or is that happening? is that like metaphorical for his isolation? Is that a metaphor for his isolation,
That's what I got. Yeah.
or is that like the haunting surrounding the place? I actually thought that moment was confusing, so I was like, so that's either his isolation or it's haunted, and I can't tell. Maybe it's supposed to be built. Okay, I'm sorry, I just had to answer that question because I wasn't sure that's what I picked up off of it.
And then soon after that one was the lights out scene.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a strange scene straight from the movie Lights Out that was done better in the short film than the feature. So it was a really well done scene, but it's still a lights out scene.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a very derivative. It felt very derivative. But I thought it had very interesting ways to kind of split the couple apart, where it kind of gets in each of their heads in a different way and kind of manipulates them. So they kind of seem alienated and kind of repelling each other at one point, and because of this way this thing's manipulating them.
One of the moments that I thought, and here's the thing, and like I said, and this is a good thing because it is a horror movie with a social message, and I think there's nothing, and of course I encourage that. A lot of people don't like to see that in movies. I think that's pretty stupid. All movies are going to have some kind of message or subtext. I was more distressed by the scenes of the wife walking through her town, not being sure of where she's at, feeling like she's in an alien environment, talking to a couple of kids who start mocking her accent and telling her to go back to Africa and making her feel alienated and unwelcome there. I thought all of that was more horrifying than the scenes that were supposed to be horror, if you know what I mean. I thought that a lot of the stuff was compelling. I thought the reasoning for what happened to their daughter and the reasoning that she's not there anymore and what they did to her, I thought was a very compelling bit of story. But like I said, another of the distressing moments is when they're having that flashback and they remember where they had to run and get on a bus while a bunch of people are shooting machine guns off of them. I felt a lot of the tension and the stress and the terror come from like the realism of the movie, comes from what they've been through, their the crisis that they're going through, what it's like to be a refugee, what it's like to face racism and prejudice in a country, what it's like to fear that people are not going to understand you and that you're going to get kicked out of your house, being called one of the good ones and stuff like that. Like it's weird because I think in so many ways this is a powerful story about refugee displacement and identity and what you have to go through, but the horror elements of it are not scary at all to me. Like none of that element is scary to me, where I felt like they could have toned this down and made it less of a horror movie and concentrated more on the drama aspects of it and the message that it was going for. I think it might have been a better film than trying to put the horror in there. The horror of it all seems tacked on. It seems secondary to me. And let's be honest. I mean, what they're going through is so horrifying that any kind of fantasy horror scenario is not going to live up to the terrors of refugees and being that. But you could do a lot more to sell that aspect of it, because there's a lot of movies that have a social element to it, like that, a heavy social element, but still manage to make the horror elements horrifying and scary. So that's where my big problem comes with this, is it doesn't work as a horror movie, though it's a good drama about the refugee crisis.
Yeah, I like the flashback sequences actually better than I did the horror sequences.
Scarier.
And I also loved all the sequences where she would go back to her hometown in her delusion or in her vision.
Mm-hmm.
Like she would go
I like that too,
and sit with all the women in her town, and that's when I really felt the drama and the conflict.
Yeah,
within her.
Everything that's compelling comes through what they've been through and their personal story and their flashbacks and what they have to face and their displacement and how uncomfortable they feel. Very little of the tension to me comes from the supernatural element. And it makes me wonder if they did this because it's hard to get people to pay attention to movies that have that kind of message in it if it doesn't have some sort of, genre element in it. If, like, most people are not going to sit through a movie about the refugee crisis. They're not going to. But if you hear that it's a horror movie in a house that's haunted while refugees are facing racism, I feel like that probably has more commercial appeal, where I kind of get the feeling that that's in the movie more to make it, I guess, give it a wider audience by having a horror element on there. But it doesn't sell that for me.
Well, it does have one really impressive horror sequence. It's the one where the being, really well designed practical makeup on this being that crawls out of the floor and then sticks its fingers in someone's wound.
That was an effective moment, yeah.
But it seemed like it was from a different movie.
Yeah, it does, because most of the horror was not like that, and the movie was going for more realism before it got to that point, I think.
Yeah. So overall, I thought his house had a really interesting concept that was sometimes very well executed. Good characters that we spend a lot of time with, but I still didn't know them by the end. I knew what their demons had done to them, but I didn't know who they were as people. And
I see that.
Mostly because the characters flip-flop in a convenient way to move the story forward. And then for me, by the end, it became metaphors and symbolism over story and characters.
Yeah, I definitely could see that. That was an effective moment, but it does seem to come at some... And one of the reasons it seems like it comes out of nowhere is that it comes so late in the movie. It's a more extreme, explicit, overt moment of horror, something very horror movie, and most of the movie as it's running, it doesn't even function that way. Even when it has the supernatural elements in it, it's done much more ambiguously and suggestively, other than outright spelling it out. And I don't think that moment arrives a little too late, that if you were going to have it be like that, the movie had to be a little bit more consistent in its horror for that moment to feel more at a peace with it. As it is, it just feels like there's a lot of great story and realism competing with horror that just cannot live up to everything else that the movie is doing right.
And I thought it delivered its message well. I mean, I don't even think the character even needed to say that at the end, where it says your ghosts follow you. You have to let them in and face yourself. And I thought it portrayed that very well, but it didn't even need the horror to portray that.
No, it didn't. So yeah, it's weird. So I have a thing where, like, I actually think it's a good movie and I think it's worth checking out. I just think as a horror film, you should temper your expectations of what you're gonna get out of it. And here's another thing. A lot of people do love this movie. I know we're in the minority. Like I said, I don't dislike it. I do enjoy it, just not as a horror film. But it did end up on a lot of 2020 best of horror lists. We have a lot of colleagues and friends of ours who really loved this movie and thought it was one of the best horror films of last year. And it was on a lot of like top 10, top 5. Not for me, like I said, because it doesn't function as a horror movie. But I think it's worth checking out. Just be aware of what it is that you're watching.
Do you agree with me where there's another movie that's does similar to what this one's trying to do, but much more effective, and that's Tigers Are Not Afraid?
Yeah, actually. I mean, not quite, but yeah, it goes for a similar type. Yeah, actually, I could totally see that.
Where the horror is almost secondary to the drama, but it's still so effective.
Yeah, that's another one where it's a very serious story. A lot of it is about drama and real life horrors that people have to face. It's not necessarily about the horror, but the horror elements in it are still scary, and they still feel like they flow naturally out of the realism of this, where in this movie, the supernatural elements seem to be at odds with the realism and the seriousness of the story.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably a good comparison.
And just to be clear, I enjoyed all three of these movies. I was entertained by all three of them. I had small problems with each one of them, but I actually ended up liking all three more than I disliked them.
I would say so. All right. My only thing is, if I sound negative, and I feel like I come across negative on this podcast because there's no one movie that I just outright praised through the whole way, like, just full on said I loved it, I thought it was awesome. But I did enjoy these movies. The one that I'm probably most conflicted about is May the Devil Take You. And that's largely because I was enjoying it for about 30, 40 minutes as something else before it turned into something that I thought was extremely simplistic for what I had just invested into the movie.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say it's a bad movie so much as a frustrating one that I think could have been a lot better, as a movie that had more potential. Like I said, I don't mean to sound harsh, but like I liked all of these movies. I just didn't love any of the movies that we're discussing, and it kind of reminds me of why. We're gonna keep doing this so we can try to explore different horror that's on Netflix. But it kind of reminds me why Netflix is not exactly the first place I run to when I'm looking for a good horror movie, a good first-time horror movie to watch.
Yeah. And that we were talking about before, they have a bunch of foreign horror movies too, and a lot of them I've never even heard before. So I got to check them out and see if they're just filler or they're actually good.
Yeah, so do I. So those are the 3 films we had to discuss for today. We are going to be back next week with 2021 horror. We are going to be discussing 2 brand new 2021 horror movies. It's a surprise yet to be announced. We're gonna catch you up on all the horror news that you've been missing out on. We haven't done that segment in a while, and we're gonna close off with a game of 2B Roulette, where we go through the 2B TV app, scroll through the horror section at random, land on a movie, kind of like the Wheel of Fortune, and we have to watch it. And in a couple weeks, we will report back to you and let you know what we thought of our blind first-time random watches from 2B TV.
Yeah. So we got a full podcast next week already.
All right. So keep up with us on social media on Instagram.com/Pickles Horror Show, and then at Facebook. Can you say it, Michael?
Facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show and Instagram @Pickles Horror Show.
Why did I get confused? I do this every week and I never get them mixed up. I don't know why. Go to our flow page. It's going to be in the description of the podcast. It's going to give you a link to everywhere that you can listen to or watch our podcast, whether it be YouTube or Apple Podcast or Spotify or SoundCloud. We'll have all the links there. We'll be coming to Anchor pretty soon. Till next week, folks, happy horror.
Happy horror.